we've all decided that it's time to get started, so we will do that. My name is Ken Basin. I'm a Senior Vice President of Business Affairs at Paramount Television and a lecturer here at the law school where I teach entertainment and media law, and that is probably the only reason why I've been permitted to sit on a panel with these four individuals. I will introduce them briefly. To my right is Bert Fields of the class of '52. He is a partner at Greenberg, Glusker, Fields, Clayman, and Mochtinger, where his clients include Tom Cruise, James Cameron, and a company you might have seen in the news recently called the Weinstein Company, which I'm sure we will be coming back to later, and hopefully not spending the entire session on, but we will get back to. To his right is Tara Kole, a partner at Gang Tire, Raymer & Brown in Los Angeles. Her clients include producer Mike DeLuca, John Avnet, and I will often remark in my work when dealing with people who are not entertainment specialists, oh, I have to talk to a real lawyer today. Tara was a clerk for Judge Kaczynski on the Ninth Circuit and for Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court, so when I'm talking to Tara, I'm also talking to a real lawyer. To her right is Ken Richman, a partner at the firm of Hanson Jacobson. Teller, Hoberman, Newman, Warren, Richmond, Rush, and Cower. He told me not to name all the names, but I had to get to the part that includes his as well, and just make a joke about entertainment firms and their love of name partners. Ken is, like me, primarily a television specialist. His clients include Samantha Bee, Bill Simmons, and I want to specifically highlight Michael Schur, the creator of The Good Place on NBC, because I just discovered the first season of that show on Netflix a month ago, and I love it. It's my favorite new network comedy. And to his right is Karl Austen, partner at Jackaway, Tyreman, Wertheimer, Austen, Mandelbaum, and Morris. Only slightly fewer names than Hanson Jacobson. You can just use the et al. Going forward. Karl's clients include Jonah Hill, the Russo brothers, and an unreasonable quorum of the cast of Game of Thrones. That's true. Across them, they represent a broad spectrum of talent in the film and television industries. Primarily, we'll be talking a little bit about the experience of that representation, the direction of the industry, maybe some hot news stories affecting the industry, and we will leave maybe 15 minutes at the end for questions from you for our panel. So please keep those in mind, and please don't make me regret allowing a full 15 minutes. Keep those robust for us, please. So I will keep this as conversational as possible, and I just want to start with a question kind of for the benefit of both students in the crowd who are contemplating their future careers and practitioners who are maybe comparing against their own experiences. I think the work that you all do in your capacity as representatives of talent and individuals in the entertainment industry is somewhat unique as a legal practice. I think a lot of the practitioners that are at this bicentennial might represent government, might represent large institutional corporate clients, or maybe less powerful individuals facing large, powerful governmental bodies or corporate bodies. You largely represent individuals who are themselves, people who have leverage, who have stature, who have notoriety. How does that affect your representation? How does that affect kind of how you approach your day-to-day practice? And I'll sort of open it up to anyone who wants to speak first.
Well, I like it. I like the individuals. People say to me quite frequently,
do we have a mic?
No mic? Well, that's all right. I'll stand up. I'm much more used to this. People ask me from time to time, isn't it terrible dealing with these people who are so temperamental, so difficult? And I've got to tell you that in my experience, and it's now quite a long experience, my clients, even though they're individuals, have really been pretty good people. Nobody is a nicer person than Tom Cruise. Jim Cameron is a brilliant, lovely guy. I don't think I've ever run into an individual client that was particularly difficult. And it's a lot of fun dealing with individuals as opposed to dealing with corporate people like him at Paramount.
I'm lots of fun.
Yeah. Unless you're on the other side negotiating with him, it's not so fun. So it's been a great experience doing this, and I really enjoyed dealing with the individuals. So maybe you guys have a different point of view.
No, I don't know if this is working or not. If you can hear me
Mine
okay.
wasn't, but
Okay.
perhaps it was deliberate.
You know, I agree with Bert. I started off at a large firm, O'Melveny and Myers, where mostly represented larger corporations, and on the entertainment side, represented movie studios and financiers. And then I transitioned over to this side a while ago, and it's just been a better match for me. I find it more fun. I love the personal connection with the clients, and I agree with what Bert said in terms of you develop a close personal connection. People come to rely on you, and look, our main jobs are to be negotiators for the clients, to be the primary deal makers in their lives. But really what comes to happen is you develop a close relationship, you kind of become their go-to advisor on anything. And so whether it's real estate issues, family issues, tax issues, things that come up in their lives, often you're the first person they call, and I really value the connection. It's fun.
I agree with that. I think it's, in addition to helping them make more money than they otherwise would make, which I agree is probably the primary purpose of our relationship as a business architect with our clients, we become problem solvers. And when you're a problem solver in that personal artist-lawyer relationship, what happens is anything can happen. Every day is a new day of issues that can come up. This morning on the drive here, I was talking to an actress where an article came out in a UK magazine saying that she was dating somebody she's not dating and had nude photos of her from a prior relationship that another boyfriend had released to the press. So you're dealing with stuff that, is not necessarily within the purview of just negotiating studio talent deals. And so I'm on the phone with the general counsel for the Daily Mail and trying to figure out what kind of letter to write that's not itself going to get published in the Daily Mail. Balancing the interests of your client with free speech and the rights of the press in both the U.S. and around the world. And you just never know. You never know what the issue is going to be because they rely on us to help them through all these things.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other big piece of it is they're people. They're not corporations. Is this helpful?
Nope.
It's not?
It's not.
So,
You sound good.
Oh, it's only for the video.
oh, okay. Then I'm just going to talk loud. So there are people which, most of the time when you're a lawyer, you're interfacing with other lawyers. It's usually the general counsel of a company who's trained as a lawyer and thinks like a lawyer. And I think one of the things that's interesting about our job is we're dealing with people, and really we're dealing with artists who, for the most part, don't think like lawyers at all. And that's often a great thing because you learn from them. It's not that they're incredibly smart and they can be incredibly business savvy, but they come at problems from a really different angle. And you have to sort of work, you have to really think hard about how to present things to them, and how to talk to them in a way that, they're going to understand, that's going to make sense to them, and it's going to help them solve their day-to-day problems because they're not sitting there sort of trying to have a sparring legal argument with you, which I imagine, though I've never actually had the experience, is often the case when you're in a corporate practice. So it really does change the dynamic, and everyone's right. I mean, the personal connection is what's most valuable and most important to me.
What about the industry context? I mean, all four of you have worked across film and television. How have those experiences kind of varied from sub-industry to sub-industry in the past, and how has what's been going on in the modern entertainment market, the sort of explosion of television, transition of clients and talent who want to work on in both film and television, change that dynamic for you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, I think obviously in the last 15 years, there's been a massive transition in the film business in terms of the raw economics, because the decimation of video, both domestically and internationally. 15 years ago, just an average motion picture would expect 35% of its revenue to come from video. Now, an average motion picture could expect about 8 to 10% to come from video, maybe less. And that has not been replaced by SVOD in the way that people had hoped it would be. Not even close. SVOD the past year was something like 11% of an average film's revenue.
SVOD being subscription video on demand, Netflix. And the like, yeah.
So you have a massive gap that's been created in the film industry, which has created a kind of a sort of an hourglass type situation in the film business, where you have a lot of movies getting made at low budgets, a lot of movies getting made at high budgets, but very few movies getting made in the middle. You have a very skinny middle. So all of those movies that were getting made in the old rectangle are not getting made as films anymore. They just can't get made, which is why there are so fewer movies getting made at the $25 to $60 million budget range. And what's happened is a lot of that artistic endeavor has fled to digital and television. So what would have been an independent film or a drama, $40 million drama, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is now an HBO movie or a Netflix movie or an Amazon 8-hour miniseries. And so tons and tons of development, production budgets have moved from film into the digital and television arena. And so a lot of our time now and revenue is definitely now in the television business because of that.
And meanwhile, you know, as Karl's saying, in the TV side, there are now over 500 scripted television shows being produced in the United States. So that spans network television, cable, the SVOD platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, et cetera. Over 500 shows. I mean, that's about double what existed about 10 years ago, if that. And that's only increasing right now. So people in our business would often refer to that as, have we reached peak TV? Are we at the point where there's more TV than can be handled? Can this continue? There's almost too much for people to watch, really. You know, I'm sure there are a lot of fantastic shows nobody can even keep up with, which in a lot of ways is fantastic for the clients and for us because it's really a lot of full employment on the TV side. That's more jobs to write TV shows, to act in them, to produce them, direct them, and so that's fantastic. At the same time, it's an interesting, challenging environment, right? Because when you're dealing with some of these newer companies, Netflix, Amazon, to a certain extent Hulu, and we'll see what happens as YouTube and Facebook and Apple get involved, it's a different corporate model. It's a different business than what we've been dealing with, right? You know, traditionally, on the TV side, you would make a deal, and we might make a deal with Warner Brothers for a television show. So back in the day when Friends was on the air, that was produced by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers would license that show to NBC for it to air here. Then they would sell reruns to other stations around the United States. They'd sell foreign rights. As Karl was saying, there would also be DVD and video rights to it. And so you'd sell all these different pots, and you could rely on Warner Brothers to try to maximize that revenue for you. So if you're a participant in the show, if you represent the creator or one of the principal actors who may have an ownership interest in the show, you can sort of rely on Warner Brothers to go out and beat everybody up and bring in as much money as possible to exploit the show. Today, when you're dealing with a company like Netflix, where the truth is they don't want to sell the show off Netflix. That show is going to exist on Netflix. Netflix is a worldwide service where they want all rights. They want the rights here. They want the rights abroad. You cannot rely on them to go out and sell rights anywhere. So how are our clients assured of making as much money as they can? And so it's a different approach. You need to get that money up front. They need to be paid and work out other structures, bonuses and what have you, to make sure you're getting a piece of exploitation on Netflix, but it's a very different model than it used
This
to
is
be.
a real issue because what Ken's saying and what Ken's talking about is these kinds of new emerging channels like Amazon, Netflix, there's no back end. Just to give you a real world example, Amazon, when they started their network a few years ago, the back end for their shows, an Amazon for Amazon show, they sent out a back end definition that was a 60% imputed license fee.
It was 65. I wrote it.
Okay, 65%, 65% imputed license fee. But it was clear Amazon owned all rights and would never sell the show to any other platform anywhere else in the world ever, which meant you had a 35% deficit perpetually, which meant no back end ever, mathematically. So that's no good for a participant on a hit show. That makes no sense in the marketplace at all. Now, they've fixed that at Amazon.
Somewhat.
They've improved it. I don't know if it's fixed. I represent Jill Soloway. We put together Transparent at Amazon, which I guess is sort of the first show that really worked there in a way and helped transform that network. And so what we did with Amazon is we worked with them to create an artificial back end, which because there's no real back end, you had to sort of create one out of whole cloth. So basically at Amazon now, if you get a third year of any show, you get a certain $10,000 per point. If you get a fourth season, you get $150,000 per point. If you get a fifth season, you get another $250,000 per point. The amount you get per point can vary depending on what stature you are in the business. But how many people watch your show, that doesn't matter how much money you make on the back end of an Amazon show because they really don't care about the metrics of what people are watching their shows. They just care about Prime memberships.
So it's interesting because I can kind of talk about this a little bit from the company side too. Being at Paramount Television now and before that at Sony Television, these are independent studios, right? We don't have an affiliated network. Paramount, there is a Paramount network that is in the Viacom family, but it is not a sort of direct relationship in the way that ABC Studios produces for ABC Network. And the pitch from the perspective of a Paramount or Sony to the talent is come to us so we can still play that role that Warner Brothers played in Ken's description. So we can take your project and not just lay it off on our one sister network because we have a corporate mandate to only sell our best projects to our sister network, but to drum up a competitive situation, find the network that's going to be the best creative fit, that's going to put the best deal on the table, and then go out and to the best of our ability still, maximize territory, media, time, sell this thing over and over again so that our profit becomes your profit. And that feeling that Karl and Ken spoke to, that back end is illusory at Netflix and Amazon, has become central to the ongoing competitiveness of independent studios because, to be perfectly honest, independence is a real liability in the marketplace. You're not protected. You don't have a guaranteed place to recoup your overhead and sell your shows. What you have to do is cultivate the best relationships with talent and try to generate exclusive talent relationships so that the talent has to come to you. And that's become a very essential part of that process.
Right, though you're still potentially selling to Netflix and to Amazon and sort of facing the same problems. Maybe, maybe not. But I think what we're looking at, what really this gets to is when you're talking about these back ends, like Karl was describing at Amazon, and Netflix does something similar where you have a back end buyout. I mean, you're getting something, but we've moved away from a model of home runs, right? I mean, when I started, the model was you did a bunch of deals, a handful of deals, and some of them became home runs. And when I say home runs, I mean our clients could potentially make, in the hundreds of millions of dollars over time. And, which meant they never had to work again. And that's a pretty incredible thing to happen to someone in their life. And it wasn't that happened all the time and to everyone, but it was possible. And we just, that still exists sometimes, occasionally, but it's rare, which means that, they're more there are more TV shows, there are more outlets, there are more partners, there are more people getting opportunities, but they're not getting 22 episodes on the air that's going to run for 14 years and have a back end that looks like Law and Order anymore, or Friends, or The Big Bang Theory. I mean, that may happen, but it's rare. They're getting 10 episodes, 13 episodes. They're getting some kind of structured buyout or a back end that may net something, or maybe some more money up front, but it changes the economics of the business in a really substantial way.
I agree.
And part of that, it's a variety of things going on, because I think, just to try to break that down a little bit more, there's been since we've been doing this over the last couple of decades, for sure, there's been a ton of vertical integration in our business, right? So that now it's not simply Netflix wanting to sell worldwide. It's Disney, ABC owns ABC Network, but they own ABC Studios. Virtually every show that you watch on ABC Network is owned by ABC. Not everyone, but probably about 80 to 90% of them. Similarly, on NBC, which used to pick up shows from pretty much every studio out there, now the vast majority of shows you're watching on NBC are owned by Universal, which is NBC. And similar on down the line with Fox and CBS. And so it's not simply a function of Netflix and whatnot. So that's one of the underlying issues going on. And to Ken's point, which is, it can be constructive to have an independent studio. He's at Paramount, Sony's another, Warner Brothers is another, which isn't owned by a network. The virtue in that can be, hey, you're at that studio, can we still replicate or perpetuate what used to exist when Warner Brothers would sell shows all over the place? And now, in this current environment with the Netflixes and Amazons, et cetera, it's a push-pull for us, Ken, to be honest, because it sometimes can be great to have an independent studio. Sometimes you want it, but sometimes in representing talent, we'd like to make the deal directly with Netflix, because you can cut out the middleman or middle person, and that service that you're providing and for which you guys are paid fairly handsomely, if we can get that to go straight to our clients, it might make sense. Obviously, when the independent studio controls underlying rights and the rights to formats and books and other material which is necessary to make the show, of course we'd go with an independent studio, but it may or may not make sense.
Yeah, and by the way, the dynamic that Tara described as sort of the collapse of the home run model is also true on the corporate level as well. I mean, all of entertainment, this goes for film as well as for television, has been structured for decades on the idea of a couple of mega hits subsidizing a wide array of less successful shows, and that has had consequences in a lot of ways. From the studio perspective, I will frequently talk about a portfolio of shows on different types of networks as a diversified investment portfolio of different asset classes. You've got your broadcast shows that are high risk, high reward, those are your stocks. You've got your cable shows that have lower deficits and therefore lower risks, can still be very, very productive and profitable, like a Breaking Bad or a Walking Dead, that you might think of as your mutual funds. And your Netflix, Amazon shows where you're guaranteed a profit, but your upside is capped because of the structure of the deals as a high yield bond. And as a studio, I think you need to think about really diversifying across those asset classes and leaving yourself an opportunity to find the few big hits that you can while still sort of keeping the lights on, but also being responsive to the opportunities that the market provides you.
I'd be interested to know what you guys who do so much television work think is the future of network television. Will there be a CBS television as we know it 10 years from now?
I mean, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
We're making a ton of deals, just, and I'm sure you guys are as well, in the last few weeks with Warner Brothers for CBS All Access, with CBS for CBS All Access, and CBS All Access is their new over-the-top app. If you guys watch the new Star Trek, that's on CBS over the top, and this is another example of what Ken and I were talking about before with no upside. So CBS is now got this app, and they're going to have a bunch of shows that you can only watch on the app in first run, like Star Trek, and they've got a couple other things coming along.
The Good Fight.
Yep, that's a spinoff of The Good Wife. And high-budget shows, great fees up front, but no way to ever make any back end on the show, ever. And no artificial value proposition for upside in the way that Netflix or Amazon has come up with. And I don't know that there will be. The only way you're going to make any real money is by doing an overall deal with CBS, ultimately, and getting advances against an illusory back end. And I think Bert, in 5-10 years, all CBS shows will run through their over-the-top platform, and you'll get it for $10 a month.
I don't entirely agree. I do think CBS exists in 10 years. I think ABC exists in 10 years. I think they'll be different. You know, I think at the moment you still have a huge. 35 years ago, there were four channels on television, right? And that's all you had. And so if anybody was watching TV, you know, any big show on television, even a mediocre one, actually even a mediocre show on television did a rating which is 10 times probably higher than the highest rated show right now. But that's because there are hundreds of networks, hundreds of channels. I think the networks still exist. I just think their ratings their share continues to decline somewhat. I agree with Karl and Tara that each of these networks will migrate a bunch of their programming to their own service, their own direct-to-consumer service. But I think they still exist. It's still a place where you can aggregate the largest audience, at least for now. It might be different in 20, 25 years. I think 10 years from now, it still exists.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know what the timing is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what it's going to be in 10 years, it may not change substantially, but it's not going in the direction of more network programming and more network dollars. Even right now, you know, the model that we're describing on the TV side and that Ken was really describing on the TV side of the vertical integration, that's because the networks have really become kind of loss leaders. They're the place the studio puts their shows in order to sort of make their money in the aggregate. But the networks themselves, at least they'll sit and tell you all day and all night that they're not terribly profitable anymore, not in the way that they used to be. And things are moving to an a la carte model. And if you look at, you know, young people these days, they're not growing up knowing what CBS and NBC and ABC are, not even close. I would say I have a 4-year-old. When he was 2, he knew what Netflix was and he knew what Amazon was. One time we looked at On Demand, and I remember he goes, oh, ABC? Is that a channel for the alphabet? He had no idea what it was, and he still doesn't. And I don't know when he's ever going to learn, and I'm not sure he will. So I think it's inevitably moving to some kind of a la carte model. There's no question.
Will people continue to put up with advertising that interferes with their dramatic programs when they can get dramatic programs that aren't interfered with?
Well, that's why I think there'll be an acceleration to the over-the-top models. And also just the television manufacturers are driving it. And they're going to be owned by these media companies. So, you know, when you turn on your TV and your Apple, you know, controls what you see, you're not going to get a network. You're going to get Apple and what Apple's driving. Mm-hmm. You're going to get Netflix, Amazon, CBS over the top, the Disney Channel, and you know, Ken, I'm sure you know might be right. It may take longer before the networks are totally gone, but they won't really be gone. They'll be there. The media companies that drive this and drive the content will be there. We're just talking about what pipe drives the eyeballs.
Well, that's the thing.
I think it's so interesting, Karl, that you bring up the idea of device manufacturers being in control, because it's an everything old is new again sort of business model. That was the 1920s, forward, right? That was radio manufacturers getting into the business of creating radio networks that became ABC and CBS so that they could push radios. That was RCA, right? That was GE owning NBC during the 80s and 90s. I mean, at every phase from the 20s through the 90s, that there was a play on that model, and it sort of fell apart for 25 years, and now it's sort of on the way back with the device ecosystems that are built up around Google, Amazon, Sony.
Right. I mean, and Amazon is doing it to sell you shampoo. So.
Yeah, I think Google TV, Facebook TV, Amazon TV, Apple TV, 20 years from now, that's how people will watch television.
By the way, the other people kind of driving that on some level, and it's not across the board true, are actually our clients and the creators. Because the truth of the matter is, and though I will say that this has been an unusual change for me, that I've had a lot of network development this year. A lot of creators and clients of mine have done a lot, are doing a lot for network for some reason. But for the most part, the people who I represent, I think we all represent, especially on the TV creator side and on the actor side too, when they come in and they say, and you say, what do you want to do? They don't say, I want to make a broadcast network show for NBC. They might, it might happen, but most of them are excited about the creative possibilities on cable, and they talk about the Breaking Bads and the Transparents and the shows like that. Again, not across the board, and some will look at it and say the economic model might be better on network. Let me go for it, and that's what I write, and that's what I write well. But certainly, I see a lot of creators trying to push toward these. What about Netflix? What about Hulu? After they saw The Handmaid's Tale.
I think it's a couple things. One, well, I think that's true. People are definitely attracted to the freedom of cable, and Netflix creators are. Mm-hmm. At the same time, now when Netflix is premiering a new show virtually every 2 weeks, and a lot of them are being dropped after their first season, it loses some of its appeal. Back when Netflix would premiere 5 shows a year, and every one of them was basically guaranteed a second and a third season, and they didn't have to discuss ratings or be concerned about failure initially. Creators were really attracted to it, but when you have a bunch of shows that are out of the gate not getting a lot of attention, I think that changes. Bert, to your question about will people put up with advertising, look, the cost of these shows now is going through the roof too. You talked about film earlier and how it costs a lot of money to make these movies. Right. TV right now, and a lot of that is just due to competition from these big streaming services, where if they're willing to pay actors and talent hundreds of thousands of dollars an episode in the first season of a show, and networks have to compete with that, it's just driving up the costs. Someone has to pay for that, right? And so it's all well and good to say people don't want to sit through ads. At the same time, then it's just going to drive up the monthly subscription rates. And so one way or another, people are paying for this, right? And yes, it can be a loss leader, and Amazon is willing to lose tons of money, but over time, they're not. Over time, at some point, Netflix is not going to be okay putting $8 billion a year into programming and to not make money on their programming. So one way or another, people are going to need to do it. And so when you're Universal or NBC Universal and you're making a show, you just need to make sure one way or another you're making money, and they'll sell that show where they can. They'll put it on Hulu, and some of that will be on ad-supported Hulu. Some of it will be on subscription-based Hulu. They will put it on their own Xfinity service. They'll put it all over the place, and the key really for all of these outlets obviously is to make sure they can monetize it. And so how do you do that? They just need to make sure they can measure it. The feeling in our business on our side is, for much of the last 8, 9, 10 years, pitifully, we'll get up in the morning and we'll see what the ratings were for shows last night. You'll see how did it do, and represent the creator of a new show, and you'll see it didn't do very well, and it's kind of dead right out of the gate. But really, what was happening is, so every year you'd see the ratings were going down, literally. And when we get some ratings report every morning, it'll say, here's what it did, which is down 10% from its premiere from last season, or the week ago this year, it's down 12%. But the reality is, so much of what's happening there is just the overnight ratings are not telling anywhere near the full story anymore. Now in television, advertisers also don't really pay very much attention to what was the rating in the live broadcast. They look at 2 different measures. It's live plus 3 days, or live plus 7 days. And increasingly, the various purveyors of television, the studios who own them, are encouraging people to look at other statistics of really over the life of the show, over the first month, and trying to broaden that out just to make sure they can measure it and then capture it. Because the other thing that's going to happen here is we're going to get ratings on Netflix. You're going to see ratings on Amazon shows. You're going to see ratings on Hulu. The system is not going to hold where people have no idea who's watching that. And that helps everyone monetize it. And so I do think you're going to have a system still with advertising, but subscriptions also.
Well, and Netflix has started experimenting with advertising in a really stealth way on their multi-camera comedies. As they've started experimenting with this more network style of entertainment, they've been sneaking advertisements in. And I know in this Kathy Bates dispensary show, they filmed ads in the style of the show. If you were watching, you couldn't actually necessarily tell, is this a fake ad? Are they advertising real?
Yeah.
And then you realize it's a real brand that's really being advertised that is totally integrated into the show. Which, and Netflix had said for a long time, we're so against advertising. Customers hate advertising. We're all about customer experience. But they're finding a way to do it without betraying the customer experience because, Netflix needs to recoup that investment. They're cash poor right now and borrowing money out the nose. And it hasn't shown up at their stock price yet, but it may eventually. I have one last question on this area, and then I want to pivot somewhere else. Ken, at one point you made reference to peak TV, which is the phrase that John Landgraf, the president of FX, sort of coined to describe the era that we're in. I think at the time that he said it, there was something like 400 or 450 original series on television. As you noted, it's now up to about 500. Is the bubble going to burst?
I think it has to, right? I mean, there's,
And what's the time frame, I should say, also?
I mean, I think Hollywood is a place where bubbles burst because people get exuberant about content and people come in and they all want to play in our field, right? It happened in film for a long time. I feel like there were always, and there still are, new entrants come in all the time. They want to come be a part of this. They want to experiment with it. Some of them stick around, and a lot of them kind of lose their shirts over time and leave the marketplace. So I think you'll see, in the television business, that's a little bit of a new phenomenon, but it's not in the feature business at all. And I think you'll see a lot of people come in, who've entered the marketplace. They're already starting, some of them are already starting to migrate out. WGN, I think, is migrating out. A&E was doing scripted programming, and they kind of abandoned ship. Some of these places, I think, right now it's the new normal for some digital entrant to come in and declare that they're going to spend $1 billion on programming. Some of those programs will not work, and some of them will say, forget it. This is crazy. We spent $1 billion and we don't want to be here anymore, and we don't like it here, and we don't want to play your game. And you can tell sometimes, I think, that some of these entrants who come into the marketplace, when they're coming in and starting to make deals, and they are trying to reinvent the rules, and they're trying to come in and kind of rethink how Hollywood does what it does. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it becomes a failed thought experiment on some level. So I think you'll see some of that. I do think there's going to be a fair amount of content for a while. I don't think that the 500 is going to shrink to 100 anytime soon. But some people will start to go. There's no question to me.
I don't think the number of television shows is going down. I think that number will continue to go up. I think that I completely agree with what Tara said in terms of a number of these cable networks will go away. I don't think there's enough to sustain certain services, right? If they can't continue to get subscriber rates, if they're not making enough money, they're not going to stay in business. At the same time, though, in this world where so many shows are 10 episodes, 12 episodes, 13 episodes, or 8 as opposed to 22, I think you're going to have a lot of different shows. You're going to continue to have 500 plus or more, and if we're having this conversation in 5 years, that number is going to be higher. But I think that some of the players, some of the companies will disappear. That's my opinion.
So I want to pivot a little bit to talk about recent events and start with you, Bert, on this one. Obviously, as I mentioned, you represent the Weinstein Company, and more broadly, I think you have a great history in your career as serving the crisis manager role that Karl had described in his relationships with his clients for a variety of individual and corporate clients. So when something breaks, like what's currently going on with Harvey Weinstein, which I want to talk about more broadly, but start here. How do you counsel your client? What's the experience of your client coming to you, and how do you deal with that situation initially?
Well, of course, it varies from client to client and crisis to crisis. The moving parts are, of course, the courts. Somebody suing somebody. Is your client being sued? Does your client want to sue somebody? At the same time, you want PR help. And many lawyers who practice in this field become skilled at being a PR representative. They learn to handle press conferences, and they actually do that.
Many lawyers, we include Bert.
Well, it's a lot of fun having a press conference. Don't dismiss it. The Weinstein situation is a a great example. It's no secret that Harvey Weinstein committed a lot of very, very bad acts. Now, what happens to his company? And what does the lawyer do to, I am one of them, who is representing the Weinstein Company, not Harvey. And we're trying to keep the company alive and afloat. And it's not easy because the name has become toxic. And they're going to change the name, for example. But is that going to make people want to see Weinstein movies? Even though it's called, let's say, Pathfinder Films now. I don't know the answer to that. And of course, we have our first lawsuit from a woman who is suing the company for negligence in not restraining Harvey from doing the things that he did, which is unique. And I think we're going to get maybe 15, 20 of those lawsuits. And it raises a lot of interesting issues. This woman, for example, voluntarily, according to her own story, went up to Harvey's hotel room, and they're engaged in some sexual acts voluntarily. She doesn't say he forced her or anything like that. She does say that he told her he would help her career. Now, and so she is suing the company for not restraining Harvey from doing that kind of thing. Well, I know that almost everyone in the room will disagree with me, but let's take a hypothetical. If you, a woman, let's say, says, I'll go to your hotel room and we'll have sex and you will pay me $1,000, and they complete that transaction. She has committed a crime, prostitution. And in some states, the man is liable also. But let's say the woman is told, I'll get you a prime part in a movie. And for that consideration, she goes up to the hotel room and does exactly the same sexual act. Is that different? The consideration is different. It's not money. He's getting her a part in a movie, and that's going to be money. In this instance, the man is guilty of sexual harassment under what most people argue today, and the woman is guilty of nothing, even though she went up to the room, had sex with the man in order to get a part in his movie. Is there really a difference between that and the woman who took money? Most people in society today would say, hell yes, there's a difference. I mean, he had power and he got her to go to his room with this power. But at bottom, he's really just saying, I'm giving you a part in a movie for which you will get money and we'll have sex. We have to deal with these and think carefully about them. This woman, another issue is the statute of limitations. This happened 10 years ago. And her testimony is, well, but I didn't know Harvey was doing it with all these other women. And it's because he did it with all of these women that the board of directors should have known. Had I known that, I would have filed a lawsuit 10 years ago. Does that get around the statute of limitations? Hell, I don't know. But I'm certainly going to argue the statute of limitations is run on this claim. Those are the issues that we are facing, and they're complex. I hesitate to say it, but they're actually fun to deal with. Those of us who do this kind of thing secretly get fun out of dealing, unfortunately, with other people's misery. We try cases and they're exciting and I love doing it, but the client doesn't always love the process, and it's anomalous that it's that way. Enough about Weinstein, or do you want more?
Well, I guess I would ask you, Bert, too, because obviously one of the other issues that's at play there, too, is was it consensual, was it not? And clearly there are other cases that are involved here where certainly the women coming forward are not acknowledging or saying that this was consensual in any way. And so what situation does that put you in, and how do you feel about that?
No question. No one can conceivably justify non-consensual sex with a woman. I mean, that's disgusting. Should never happen. Cannot be excused. And if I'm called upon to defend something like that, confession and avoidance. I just say, Your Honor, I cannot defend this kind of thing. I can only tell you that the company should not be held responsible for this man, because if we go down that road, a lot of companies are going to be liable for a lot of things that they really didn't expect to be liable for. So that's the woman that, in the instance I'm talking about, concedes that there was no force, that she did not say no at any time, which makes a big difference. Sure. She said yes, 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 and then 10 years later, she says, oh, this was terrible. And actually, the theory is an interesting one, and that is she couldn't know to bring a negligence lawsuit because she didn't know that this was a repetitious act, so that there were all these other women who were doing this. So she thought she was the only one. And now she knows, and so the statute shouldn't run against her. And I don't know the answer, but I'm certainly going to argue that it ran.
And putting aside the issues of sort of substantive law, and for each of you who all work as counselors, even if you don't necessarily work as litigators, I mean, talk more about whether it's somebody, Harvey or somebody like Harvey, or any number of other kind of personal or professional scandals that arise for your clients. I mean, how do you react personally to those situations? How do you square your obligations to your client and your relationship with your client with how you may feel about some of the things that went on, and sort of dive into those situations as the representative?
Well, I think I've been very fortunate in the 28 years I've done this that I haven't had any moral issues with anything my clients have ever been involved with or done. So I haven't had to cross that Rubicon personally, but the first thing you do is you establish a relationship of confidentiality, and from that trust, then some of these issues are very, very vulnerable, personal. They get into issues of family and livelihood. They could really change somebody's life in an instant. Things that have happened to them, or things that they said, things that that they did that you have to help guide them through. So it really starts with the relationship of trust and giving them your best good judgment about how to move through something like that. Sometimes we find other counselors that are specialists in the field. There are crisis publicists that are really great at this stuff. Bert mentioned before, we become ourselves publicists at some point. I think the three of us are more silent publicists and very much behind the scenes and off the record. So we'll put someone that's really a professional crisis public relations person. There are a couple of very, very good ones that can help manage things. That can be really helpful.
In some instances, you come to the point where you have to fire the client. And a notable one in my background is our president, Donald Trump, who was a client and who I proudly fired, fortunately in writing. He did something that was absolutely disgusting and morally depraved, and I fortunately wrote him a letter saying, I can no longer represent you in anything. He said, oh, please don't do that. His partner said, don't do that. I said, I won't come near this man ever again. Again, fortunately, this was in writing. 2 years later, Donald Trump published a book. And he said in the book, this fellow, Bert Fields, supposedly a legend, he's no good, I fired him. That's your president, guys. I descended on the publishing company, and fortunately I had the letters, and so they took it out of the book. But it demonstrates the kind of thing. In any event, the point I was making is every once in a while you come to the point where you just have to fire a client. They've done something wrong, and you just can't cover it up. There's nothing you can do. You've got to get rid of them.
But also, I think what we also deal with is even if there are, morally depraved acts, which I thankfully I don't feel like I've had to encounter much. Definitely have clients who get in trouble, who behave badly or who have substance abuse issues, aren't able to conduct themselves on a set in the proper way, and I've found myself a number of times with clients just wearing a different hat, right? Where and this is someone hopefully, as Karl said, you have a relationship of trust and you've been with for a while, and you meet with the client or you'll get on the phone with the client and you can just say, listen, I understand you may not feel you're doing this or you may not feel you have a problem in this area, but I'm your lawyer. I'm trying to help save your job here. And if you want to save your job and if you want to go down a certain path, here are things you're going to have to do. And whether you want to acknowledge certain issues or not, here's the road ahead. And I'm not judging you, and at the same time, I'm advising you that this is what's going to happen if you don't do this, that, and the other thing. And it really depends on the client, but generally, they hear you, and they know that if you're someone who cares about them and has a long relationship, it works itself out that way. It's a different hat, for sure.
And from the other side, I can certainly attest that role that you all as the lawyers can play can be really critical and valuable in really saving the client in those situations. I've been the responsible executive on shows where, an actor has a substance abuse problem or there's a behavioral conduct problem. And, sometimes you have the agent or lawyer who calls you and denies that anything is wrong and screams at you and tells you that you're a monster for alleging that their angel of a client could have done such a thing. And frankly, those situations usually escalate and end very poorly. And on the other hand, you have the representatives who say, you know what, you're right. We need to fix this together. We need to sort of enter into a partnership to resolve the situation, to save the show, save the project, and save the person. And those are the ones that really kind of get through and reach a situation that, lets everybody kind of move on with their lives. But, obviously it's easier to do that in some of these less morally charged contexts, right?
Sometimes we make terrible mistakes in dealing with situations like that. I can recall representing a studio, and we were making a picture starring Rita Hayworth. Those of you who are approaching my age remember Rita Hayworth, and the rest of you will not. She was a wonderful, famous star, and she would show up every day, and she didn't know her lines. It seemed like she just didn't care. She couldn't remember 2 lines ahead of what she was supposed to say. And this went on, and we warned, and we said, and finally, we were ready to file a lawsuit, and they were going to fire her off the picture. And I was very angry because the studio was my client, and they had made a huge investment in this film, and she was really screwing it up. And we were very, very hard on her. And finally, her daughter showed up and made an arrangement with the studio. I think she paid some money to the studio, and they replaced Rita Hayworth. And I found out, to my shame later on, that she had something we didn't even know the name of in those days, Alzheimer's. And she wasn't just unwilling to memorize her lines, she couldn't do it. And we didn't know, and to this day, I'm ashamed of the way we behaved, but we didn't know any better. Who knew that there was such a thing as Alzheimer's in those days? And these are the kinds of crazy things that we encounter in this wonderful area in which we're practicing law. It's just a marvelous thing to do with your life. Not that, I mean, that was not marvelous.
So one kind of subtopic of this I want to circle back to, Bert, you in particular kind of mentioned reaching that point where you have to bow out, and what that immediately recalls to me, also in reference to the current Weinstein situation, is Lisa Bloom. So Lisa Bloom is an attorney who represented Harvey Weinstein, also Roy Price, the since departed head of Amazon Studios, who's had one of these scandals of his own, the daughter of Gloria Allred, and she was the sort of public face of the representation for both Roy and Harvey, and then within the span of about a week and a half, these scandals broke. She went from being the public face of the defense to stepping out of the representation, and has gotten a lot of criticism, both in the entertainment press and in the non-entertainment mainstream press, for her role in that situation. As attorneys, as representatives, how do you react to what happened with her in the course of this?
Well, okay.
I mean, no, I don't think it's too touchy. I mean, look, here's the thing. We're not responsible for our client's conduct, but we are responsible for our own conduct, right? And so at some point in time, I don't know if this pertains directly to her situation, but at some point in time when we have clients who are, we're more on the transactional side, obviously, but who are behaving in a certain way or wanting to go down a certain road or wanting us to take certain positions in deals, which are just not right or comfortable, or wanting us to go back on a deal or change what we agreed to, you know, we have our own code of conduct as to how we have to behave as well. And there's a point at which we're not comfortable doing things, and I won't take a certain position. And if that means I'm parting ways with the client or the client's parting ways with me, that's okay. That's life. I may not, I can't control everything they do, but I can control what I do.
I agree with that. I think beyond that, it's really important, at least when you're in a more mature place in your career, that you are a little circumspect about who you're representing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're all very fortunate to be at a place in our career where we can pick and choose a little bit about, you know, what we want to do and who we want to represent. And, you know, I'll only represent someone I'm really passionate about and who I think is really talented, and where I feel that I can be of some value. And I'm not sure that, and I can't speak to the case you brought up. I don't know her. I don't know the situation with those two people. But I think that there are certainly lawyers who are going to find themselves choosing clients for the wrong reasons. And then it's not surprising that they're going to find themselves in that kind of situation.
But sometimes the ugly client that you don't really respect deserves representation. We now see a good friend of mine, David Boyce, is a wonderful lawyer, who was catching hell in the press because he represented Harvey Weinstein. And the issue is one, and it's an interesting issue. People are arguing, well, David, you knew what he was doing and you didn't tell anyone. Well, isn't that what a lawyer is supposed to do? I mean, I'm not justifying what Harvey Weinstein did, but his lawyer certainly had two choices: either stop representing him or clam up about it. You're certainly not supposed to go to the press and say, you know, my client is doing terrible things. I mean, that's nuts. And David didn't do anything that was improper. He certainly had no duty, as contrary to what a number of newspapers are saying, to go to the board and saying, my client is doing this bad stuff. He was retained to protect his client, and that's what lawyers do. And at some point, he had to make the decision, could I continue to represent this guy? And by the way, he is no longer representing Harvey. What he knew and whether he crossed the point at which he should have said, I can't represent this man anymore, that's a difficult decision. I mean, is Harvey not entitled to get a lawyer now? I think of course he's entitled to get a lawyer, and that lawyer should defend him to the utmost. Every fiber of that lawyer should defend Harvey Weinstein. That's what we do. And sometimes we defend unpopular, even disgusting people like Harvey Weinstein. So we shouldn't be too quick to say, well, we're not going to represent this guy because he's a scoundrel. Scoundrels are entitled to a defense.
I think one thing that you said, Karl, that is important also is the issue of whether you're public or circumspect about your representation, also the measure of authenticity that comes with that. In my read of the Lisa Bloom situation is that the flack that she has gotten is not necessarily because she was representing Harvey Weinstein, but because she had spent a considerable amount of effort cultivating a public persona, a sort of public status as a defender of women, and that her representation of Harvey Weinstein and of Roy Price seemed so completely at odds with that it called into question the sincerity of that earlier representation. Whereas on the other hand, Harvey's now hired Patty Glazer as his litigator to represent him in a potential action against the Weinstein Company over his termination. And yeah, I think everybody who's been involved in Harvey's professional life is getting some flack. But there's no comparison between the reaction that Patty has gotten versus what Lisa has gotten, because Patty has never been out there telling the world, I'm a defender of women. She says, I'm an aggressive litigator who defends my clients, and that's what I do. And so her representation of Harvey is not at odds with that persona. Does that resonate for anybody else? Or?
Well, it resonates with me because I want to see her complaint that sues us, claiming that this is wrongful termination. I mean, if ever somebody had a ground to fire a guy, it seems like it was the Weinstein Company. But Patty is going to do it, and I guess I'll defend it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I hear what you're saying, Ken, and I think, on some level, and what Bert is saying, it's a little bit different for probably the three of us as, sort of more personal, transactional representatives of clients, as opposed to when you're a litigator and you're taking the position of, you're defending somebody and people deserve a defense in a litigation situation. I think that's different than what, Karl is talking about when he says, I'm only going to take on clients who I'm passionate about and feel are talented. And I think the implication that he's also making in that is that he likes them. And I think for the three of us, we don't take on one case, and we're not going to be in that situation that Lisa Bloom would be in, where you're taking on one client sort of in one matter and coming out and sort of putting yourself on the line for them in that instance. We're really taking on people because we're looking at their whole career and we're going to be a part of their lives for a long time. I mean, there are people who I think we've all represented probably since the very beginning of our careers and their careers, and we really grow with them and we spend time with them and we invest in them on some level. I mean, one of the things about the business that we do is we don't bill by the hour, which is it doesn't sound like a big thing. It's a huge thing, both in terms of the way that we spend time with them, because we're not charging them in 6-minute increments. So we're able to sort of spend time and be on the phone with them and talk to them, and it doesn't feel like they're running up a bill. And we take a percentage of what they make in the entertainment business, which means that we're essentially investing in them and investing in their careers. So I just think it's a different dynamic in terms of the relationship.
So I want to pivot for about 10 minutes and maybe ask a couple questions that are more directed towards the law students in the room. So how has, well, let me start with a broader question. What's your kind of general advice to the law students in the room who may be interested in a career in entertainment about whether or not to pursue it, and if so, how to position themselves for opportunities and success doing what any of you do?
Well, I can tell you what I tell my kids at Stanford. I teach at Stanford Law School. And I say it is very difficult to break into the entertainment business for a young lawyer. Most law firms, these smaller boutique firms, often do not hire right out of law school. Some do. Others don't, but it's very, very difficult. The larger law firms often will want to put you in some other department, and my students will say, well, what department should we go in? And I advocate litigation because I think it's a wonderful background for almost any field, but particularly for the entertainment business. I think to spend a couple of years working on what goes wrong with the deals, you begin to get an insight as to how to handle those deals when you finally move over into the entertainment department. But at bottom, I have to tell them, it's going to be very hard to get a job immediately out of law school. Try the studios. Those are terrific jobs, really, as a learning experience. Try the networks. We used to say, try the record companies. We don't say that so much anymore. But there is no easy answer. It's very difficult if your aim is to be in the entertainment field. Very difficult to get started. And I just say, go out, take what job you can, try to get into something that will enrich your experience and make you a better entertainment lawyer when you make that move.
Yeah, I agree with that. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, there was maybe 1 or 2 firms in New York, 3 or 4 firms in Los Angeles, including Bert's firm, that would have 1 or 2 summer associate positions that were entertainment transactional law positions. That's gone. Doesn't exist anymore. Now you really don't have an entry-level entertainment law, talent law, transactional entryway, and there's no mailroom to become an entertainment lawyer. In the same way that there's a mailroom to become a development executive or agent or manager in the entertainment business. So, I mean, I started in the mailroom at TriStar Pictures because I couldn't get a job in one of the sort of more traditional entertainment law paths. And that led to a job at an entertainment transactional firm. I think if I were doing it right now, I'd probably want to get a job at an agency in Los Angeles, maybe in New York, but probably in Los Angeles is a better choice in terms of your education and getting the most knowledge and relationships. And start in the summer, and when you get out of whatever school you're in, try to get a job in the mailroom at William Morris or CAA or UTA or one of the big agencies. I think that's the best education, training. You can, if you want to be an entertainment lawyer, you can get into business affairs there. There actually is a business affairs track now at all 3 of the major agencies. And that's excellent training. The last person I just hired came out of WME. He was a TV lawyer at WME. He'd worked there for 4 years out of law school, and I hired him as an associate at the law firm. And, you know, we don't hire anybody that doesn't have 3 or 4 years of experience.
Generally, yeah, same thing Karl said. I started off at one of those firms that was a bigger firm that had an entertainment department, more did corporate work there and did that for a couple of years, then came over to my firm. We generally don't hire straight out of law school, but I do like hiring people from law firms. So I like people hiring people who have at least a couple or a few years of experience, ideally with a little bit of entertainment exposure, even if there's not much. And so my advice is, yes, the agency route can work well if you're in the right spot there. But I think it's going to a really good law firm, get really good experience, and hopefully it's a place that does a little bit of work such that there might be some interaction with folks who do this, because usually we hire folks who we've dealt with on the other side, who are working for the bigger companies and who we just had a good interaction with and just liked them. And so, you know, that's generally my take on it. And if you're really passionate about it, and you're trying to meet people and you're trying to get a little exposure and contact with people, usually good things come from it. I will say you kind of have to be in Los Angeles or New York. You know, it's sort of, in general, yes, there can be exceptions to that, Nashville or elsewhere, depending on what you're trying to do, but for the most part, it's out there.
Yeah, I think you have to move to, I actually think you have to move to Los Angeles. I think you just have to, you're going to end up there anyway eventually. New York is even very hard to really find jobs there. You know, in terms of hiring, we've mostly hired people, last 3 associates we hired were all out of bigger firms in Los Angeles that had this sort of what Ken's talking about, maybe a little bit of tangential relationship to entertainment on the transactional side, so people could hit the ground running fast. I think the most important thing is that you hire somebody who's really smart and somebody who's had enough experience in some context of having a job, knows how to kind of juggle between working for different lawyers, because a lot of what our practice, at least our practice tends to be a lot of juggling between a lot of different deals, a lot of different clients, and working for usually a number of different lawyers. So people who kind of know how to do that and have the experience of that. I think the other sort of intangible thing that we look for, besides the obvious judgment, things like that, is a certain amount of social skills and the ability to interact with people, because our clients are people and individuals, and most of the people we deal with all day are usually more like agents, managers, people as studio executives, not so much other lawyers who just want to talk about law. So we're really also looking for people who, I describe it as, can look you in the eye when you meet and can have a conversation and can engage. And the other thing that I think is probably most important, or at least is a threshold issue for me when I interview somebody, is do they like movies and TV? Yes. And the number of people who've come into interview and I say, what do you watch? What do you like? And they look at me with a blank stare, like they have no idea why I'd asked that question, and they feel really uncomfortable with it. It amazes me. I'm like, this is the easy one. Tell me, I'd love it.
I completely agree, because this is what we do all day.
Right.
And you want people who are fired up about it, right?
That's job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're not gonna have a business, and you are not gonna do this well, and you are not gonna argue for people's trailers to be the right size trailer if you don't love movies and television. You're in trouble. And by the way, I don't care if you have good taste. Even if you tell me, like, all I want to do is watch The Real Housewives all day, I'm like, terrific. You can do something. I don't watch that, but you can do something with that. But I do find it completely confusing when people walk in the door and they're like, well, I saw a movie like 3 weeks ago and it was okay. And you're like, no, that's not helping me.
It's interesting to illustrate the kind of difficulty and ambiguity of getting into it. And Bert mentioned that he often advises his students at Stanford, well, if you can't get straight into entertainment, transactional law, if that's what you want to do, go into litigation. I tell my students exactly the opposite. I tell them you should go into a non-entertainment transactional practice, because the skill set and experience set of drafting and negotiation and talking to people on the phone in a sort of less adversarial, perhaps more collaborative environment is ultimately more important to develop and transfer into the entertainment context. And you can learn the business context and you can learn the particular deal structures, but you're better off if you know just how to be a negotiator and how to work with contracts versus learning I agree with Bert's observation that to be really good, one of the things that makes you really good at negotiating deals is to know exactly where they break down and how to protect your clients against those breakdowns. Many paths to the same destination. In many ways, I had the easiest, simplest path of all, because Karl mentioned that a small number of firms, including Bert's, have summer associate programs in entertainment, and that's what I did. Which kind of tees up my last question for each of you before we open up questions to the audience. And in the spirit of kind of this bicentennial weekend, how has your experience background with Harvard and the Harvard community kind of impacted your personal and professional development in your careers? And I'll actually also start my answer with that. I'm pretty sure that's why Bert noticed me in the first place, and I got that job at Greenberg Metzger.
Well, I noticed you in the first place because I got a call from the dean who said, this is the brightest student we think we've ever had. And we had to get him, and he was just terrific. That was how many years ago?
That was 13? 12.
Yeah, and you don't look a day older. Anyway, he proved to be terrific, and he went on to become now practically the head of Paramount Studios. Practically, it's a big gap, but practically.
It's a large space, in fact. Right?
Yeah. Right. Guys?
Harvard, that was not meant to be about
When I was here, there was no entertainment law class or anything like that. I was interested in entertainment law sort of in theory, being a kid from Boston and not really knowing what it was. But it seemed like if I was going to be a lawyer, that was the kind of lawyer that maybe I could possibly be. So I was interested in it, but there was no entertainment law class of any kind. There was an emerging entertainment law society group, but I didn't really have. I think probably the most connectivity from Harvard Law School to my actual career is I did 9 plays while I was here, and I wrote and directed all the musical comedies. That was my extracurricular activity, and I think just sort of an immersion in the arts that I maintained after college, and I think that interest and that passion definitely carried over into my professional career, and it's informed everything I've done ever since in what I do for a living, and I think the fact that was what I was able to do that while I was here was very helpful to me. I think, I mean, having the legal background here was also incredibly helpful, but there's a language that you learn in the entertainment transactional business that is 95% of the job, other than good judgment.
I'd say 2 things. One, I was an undergrad here as well, and so in terms of more broadly Harvard, when I started doing this and started developing my business, my initial group of clients were Harvard Lampoon writer type folks who I was friends with in college, and that was just a huge start to my business and developing my practice. So my initial group of clients were, at the time, were writers on Seinfeld, and so I probably represented 8 of the 10 or 11 writers on Seinfeld during the last several years, and a bunch of them were undergrads from here who are friends of mine, and those guys are now, they run, they're the head writers or showrunners of Curb Your Enthusiasm and Veep and Silicon Valley and a bunch of other shows, and that was enormously helpful that way. In terms of the law school, on the one hand, what we do is very different from what we did here. As Karl said, there wasn't an entertainment law class. On the other hand, when I think about it, and as I said earlier, our jobs really are to advise clients in all areas, right? And we get involved in everything. And so when I think about what I do now all day, where it's helping people with family law issues or with copyright issues, or there are tax issues that come up, property issues, I'm not a perfect expert at any of those things, but I definitely draw on it. I will say the negotiation project here was really helpful, and I still remember a bunch of those initial negotiations. The first day in negotiation class, where there was the negotiation where someone was selling used law books to you. I don't know if they still do that exercise where it's you're supposed to buy law books. And I remember, I think I was the only person in class, the person I was negotiating with and I were the only ones who didn't make a deal because we couldn't agree on things. And I still think about it sometimes, and it's sort of how uncomfortable Roger Fisher made me feel for not making a deal. At the same time, I was pretty okay with it because I thought that he wasn't proposing something reasonable. I was comfortable with it, and to this day, that's part of the job still, where it's if the deal's not good enough, you may not make a deal. But I don't know.
This explains a lot, Ken.
There you go. There you go. There you go. I'm okay with it. Sorry.
No, I had a sort of unusual path where I was actually in the entertainment business on the executive side before I was a lawyer. So I came to Harvard knowing that I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer. And the truth is, when I got here, that was actually, I thought, very looked down upon. And a lot of people kind of looked at me a little funny when I said, I'm going to be an entertainment lawyer. And I remember one person, though, I'm not sure if this was at Harvard or it might have been when I was clerking after, one person said to me, "Is that like being Turtle from Entourage?" And I was like, no, Turtle seems to drive the guy around a lot, and I don't think I'm going to drive anybody around. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to I'm actually going to be a lawyer and do this differently. So I didn't think it was, it wasn't really something that felt like totally socially acceptable here, which is probably why on some level, and by the way, I loved law school. I loved it here, and I sort of went the other direction in a way and was a bit of like a clerking, I was a bit of like a nerd here where I took con law and fed courts and was really, really into it, and then clerked, as Ken had mentioned, for Judge Kaczynski on the Ninth Circuit and for Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court, where it was also kind of something I kept it very much under wraps, that I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer, because people, when I said it, looked at me like I had two heads. But the truth is, what ended up happening was that was actually my path right into entertainment law, in a weird coincidence, because Judge Kaczynski knew that I wanted to do it, and he happened to run into my current partner, Bruce Raymer, and said, I have this clerk who wants to do what you do. I have no idea why, but she's interested. Can she call you? And Bruce and I got together, and so I was able to come straight. I'm probably one of the few people who was able to go straight into a boutique entertainment firm because of that sort of odd coincidence. So I don't know what Harvard did. I guess it got me there in a roundabout sort of way, and I love the experience of being here.
Well, what it did for me, I can summarize very quickly. It taught me to think. I don't think I really engaged in the process of thinking until I got to Harvard Law School. I had a lot of fun, and I had some vague ideas about things, but I didn't really think. And I can remember the first week of property. We had a professor called Barton Leach. You probably never heard of him. He's a brilliant guy. And the first week in class, he gave us a case about adverse possession. It was called Brummagem against Bradshaw. And the case, I can't remember which way it came out, but I think it came out in favor of the person who was claiming the land, because the owner of the land had not been on it for 21 years or some period of time. And we all listened to Professor Leach, and we nodded and we nodded and we nodded, and it was the right result, and that was it. And at the end of the week, after we learned about this in some detail, he said, is there anybody here who disagrees with the result in Brummagem against Bradshaw? And of course, why would we do that? We just spent a week learning how great it was and what the reasoning was. Nobody raised their hand. And Professor Leach said, there's not a person here who's going to be a successful lawyer. He said, I am now going to be the lawyer for the other side. And he then kind of pulled his shirt out, took his tie askew, and he made this fantastic argument, demolishing everything we had just learned in the entire first week. What a blazing lightning bolt that was. I mean, there could be two sides of just about anything. What a lesson. And that's when I began to think, because I really think I had not engaged in that process before. All of us were stunned. And I particularly. Anyway, that's the one thing, and people ask me all the time, what did you get out of Harvard Law School? And I said, thinking.